Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Akshat Mehdi, and I'm currently a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. It gives me immense pleasure in extending a warm and humble welcome to all to another edition of the ICS's weekly Wednesday seminar on Chinese Wisdom on Offer, Xi Jinping's Three Global Initiatives. This seminar is the second of an ICS series on China's three global initiatives. In the last few years, Chinese President Xi Jinping has been at the center of global emphasis. At the same time, Chinese foreign policy overtures have been garnering attention as well. Among these, there are the three global initiatives, namely the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and most recently, the Global Civilization Initiative. These provide important indicators to understand the Chinese wisdom that the PRC appears to be willing to offer to the international community. It is necessary to read and understand these initiatives, their ideas and contours, as also their limitations and the challenges that they may pose to other countries. The speaker for today's session is Dr. Prashant Kumar Singh. Dr. Singh is a research fellow and center coordinator of the East Asia Center at the MPIDSA, New Delhi. He obtained his MPhil and PhD from the Center of East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His research interests include strategic and domestic affairs of China, state and society in Taiwan, and India's engagement with East Asia. He has been a recipient of numerous fellowships. His recent publication, Xi Jinping's Chinese Dream, China's Renewed Foreign and Security Policy, was published by Routledge in 2022. Today's session shall be chaired by Dr. Jabin T. Jacob, who is the Director of the Center of Excellence for Himalayan Studies and Associate Professor at the Department of International Relations and Governance Studies, Shiv Nadar University, Delhi NCR. He is also an honorary fellow at the ICS. His research interests include Chinese domestic politics, China in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region, Sino-Indian border areas, and India and Chinese worldviews, and center-province relations in China. Recently, he has co-edited several volumes, including China's Search for National Rejuvenation, Domestic and Foreign Policies under Xi Jinping in 2020, and How China Engages South Asia, Themes, Partners, and Tools in 2023. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to ask all the participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants shall be muted during the presentation. Questions may be posted in the chat box during the seminar. Alternatively, you may use the raise your hand option to ask your question during the interactive session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself and ask your question. I shall now hand over to the chair. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Akshat, and thank you to the ICS for inviting me. It's good to be back on the ICS platform. Since the introduction to our speaker has already been done, I'm only going to say that it's a particular delight for me to be chairing this session where Prashant is a speaker. Prashant and I go back a long way to JNU days, in fact. And we've, of course, been fortunate to be among the, increasingly large number of graduates from the Center for East Asian Studies in JNU's School of International Studies to actually carry on in China studies. So I think we've come a long way, and I'm particularly pleased to be sort of simply guiding proceedings here. I will let Prashant do most of the talking, but just because I have been nominated chair, I'm going to just spend a minute perhaps on this subject. I think Prashant does the right thing by bringing together or talking about all three initiatives, the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative as a collective. It would be a mistake to see them as separate entities. These three initiatives actually represent in many ways a scaling up of the Belt and Road Initiative, which just completed 10 years, or will complete 10 years come September this year. What we have to understand and acknowledge is the scale of Chinese ambition. If we thought that the Belt and Road Initiative was floundering, was going nowhere, I think these three initiatives proved the exact opposite, that the Chinese are, or at least don't think that way, and that they feel that whatever mistakes or whatever shortcomings there might be, these are possible for them to overcome. And by focusing now on these three initiatives separately, I think they are signaling to the world a bunch of things, which I hope Prashant will highlight. To my mind, these three initiatives, two of them rather tangible. I mean, of course, clearly tangible, which is when you talk about development or security, you see things on the ground, you see things happening, you were able to have reference points. But the third one, the Global Civilization Initiative, I think is really sort of going to be crucial going ahead, because this is an intangible thing. What is civilization? How do you define civilization? How do you define culture? And this, I think, sort of represents also the one of the prongs of the Belt and Road Initiative, which was talking about people-to-people contact. So this is, I think, related, and it's something to watch out for. It cannot be simply dismissed as something in the ephemeral. This has clear and present implications. And I would say, and I would argue, that together these three initiatives represent the sum of the Chinese party states' ideological preferences and, to my mind at least, zero-sum worldviews. With those few words, let me hand over to Prashant to take this forward. Over to you, Prashant, and welcome to the ICS, welcome to this platform. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob, and thank you for and thanks ICS for inviting me and to make a presentation on this topic, which Dr. Jacob has rightly underlined, a very, very important topic to understand the present ideological setup of the ideological atmosphere in China and the path its ruling party is taking. So I would like to try to make my presentation in 30 minutes or so. And of course, I will cover all these three initiatives with sufficient details, and will try to offer my analytical bits on them. And in this, what I am doing is basically I am in Chinese foreign policy discourse and what norms they are trying to build, what norms and values they are trying to create, and how are they trying to convince the international community, the world, about the Chinese power. So that is very basically my basic idea. And of course, I will highlight the limitations, challenges, and challenges these initiatives have, and they pose to the international community. So in short, the subtitle of this presentation, that is introducing China as a global power with Chinese global values, is the gist of this presentation. This is not moving.
So what is not moving? The presentation.
Yeah.
You have to share your screen again.
Pardon?
You have to share your screen, sir.
Yeah.
Click on the green button and share your screen. Yeah.
Yes. So this slide is basically just to give you an anchor. Most of the things that I have written on this slide are well known and not new. That we know that Xi Jinping's presidency has marked a transition from keeping low profile to striving for achievements for foreign policy. And Xi Jinping basically had declared China's arrival as a major power on the world scene, and he did basically not very in the beginning of his presidency only, And under him, basically, China is no longer willing to meekly accepting advantageous external environment just as a gift to be treasured, but it has engaged in conducting an alternative diplomacy, which seeks to provide alternative global perspectives, espousing new norms, creating new institutions, and trying to redefine the international liberal order in whatever way they try to. And of course, then presenting itself as a geopolitical equal to the USA has been the defining characteristics of Chinese foreign policy under Xi Jinping. Then there are some few points which we should bear in our mind, that how the right of China's overseas interest has emerged as a new foreign policy category in last 1 decade or so. And there is an unprecedented stress on the linkages on domestic and international development in the ongoing period. And then the whole thing about core interests and wolf warrior diplomacy, they have also emerged as sort of new frameworks in Chinese foreign policy under Xi Jinping. So this is the just broad picture, and the background of which we are making this discussion. But the key point that I want to highlight is this: in Chinese foreign policy under Xi Jinping, China has become very keen to offer Chinese wisdom. And there are n number of statements that you can find in Xi Jinping's speeches, Xi Jinping's basically op-eds when which he publishes before he goes to some international trip, and in various statements by his other Chinese leaders, and in the in various in the party documents, party congress documents also. So now, see, I can just highlight that the what Foreign Minister Wang Yi said in March 2018, that as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, China takes seriously its responsibility for maintaining international peace, and today China is in a much better position to help resolve various regional and international issues, and we are ready to play our part. Indeed, the world expects no less from us. And Xi Jinping in 2019, in the 17th CPC, remarked that China will continue to play its part as a major and responsible country, taking an active part in reforming and developing the global governance system, and keep contributing Chinese wisdom and strength to the global governance. And another statement is even more straightforward, that China offers a new option for other countries and nations who want to speed up their development while preserving their independence, and it offers Chinese wisdom and a Chinese approach to solving the problems facing mankind. So these statements are basically showing their confidence in their power, and confidence that that China has arrived and it has a lot to offer to the world. And what do they mean by Chinese wisdom and Chinese approach? So virtually, if you read their statements, so lots of things, lots of points may be made, but the point is basically they are saying that they are talking of Chinese experiences, Chinese practices, Chinese and cultural traditions, Chinese native wisdom, and the basically stress is on fine Chinese traditional cultural values. That the fine Chinese traditional cultural values has everything to offer as a remedy to the problems that the countries of the world and the societies are facing. So that is their basically faith in Chinese cultural traditions, and what they call fine Chinese traditional cultural values. And from there, they say that they drive Chinese wisdom from the collective wisdom of that present generation of Chinese have inherited their previous generations. So it's basically a, what should I say, their faith in basically they are underscoring Chinese culture, and the kind of basically premium on native values they are underlining in their and highlighting in their writings and statements, and saying that we have a unique wisdom to offer to the world. And if that was the basically background that about Chinese wisdom, as that is the basically is the title of my presentation. But exactly how this before I link this wisdom to my rest of the presentation, I have to briefly tell you that what is the overarching framework of Chinese foreign policy, or their understanding of the international issues, and their understanding of that how China should approach the world and what it should offer. So basically, the overarching framework is Xi Jinping's idea of a community with a shared future for mankind or humanity, variously translated, either mankind or humanity. And this is a basically idea of a networked society, highly networked society, highly globalized society, and highly interdependent society, in which, if we read their statements in entirety, that then China has a preeminent role to play. And the second element of this overarching frame is that if we can see three broad categories in their in foreign policy and their approach towards the international relations. One is development, another is security, and third is the international influence. And the three initiatives which I have chosen to speak on today: Global Development Initiative, that was propounded in September 2021, Global Security Initiative in April 2022, and Global Civilization Initiative very recently in March 2023, directly correspond to these three elements of development, security, and international influence, which they are promoting in their foreign policy. Yeah, basically, Xi Jinping introduced this is the Global Development Initiative to the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly on September 2021. And the idea of this GDI is the goal of expediting of the implementation of the 2023 agenda for sustainable goals that were adopted at the UN Sustainable Development Summit in 2015. Actually, and the context is that what they are saying, that COVID-19 has reversed Human Development Index for the first time in the recent 30 years. And some developing countries have fell back to poverty, and some developed countries are facing difficulties. And the GDI advocates cite that Sustainable Development Goals Report 2021, issued by the UN, that around 119 to 124 million people fell back into extreme poverty in 2020 due to the pandemic, basically. So the context is here the COVID-19 pandemic, the background. And in this context, basically China has sought to underscore the need to reprioritizing development, renew commitments to the SDGs, and revitalize global partnerships and reactivate development cooperation. And this is in the center of the idea of GDI. And the larger aim here is to deepen South-South cooperation, to narrow North-South gap, and address development imbalance. That is their basically stated goal under the GDI, and presenting and projecting China's role in the global South. So here the idea is mostly to how to approach the global South through GDI. And if we look at this GDI, so if we unpack the GDI, so we can see that there is a clear approach enunciated operational principles, and focus areas. So approach is basically they are staying committed to development as a priority, a people-centered approach, inclusiveness and benefits for all, innovation-driven development, harmony between man and nature, basically this environmental concerns they are talking here, and the result-oriented actions. And operational principle here is this, they are arguing for greater synergy through coordination and steering role of the UN development system, and extensive consultation and pooling collective wisdom and strength, and upholding inclusiveness, common progress, and renew global development partnership. And they have underlined around 8 focus areas, which are poverty alleviation, food security, COVID-19 response and vaccines, development financing, climate change and green development, industrialization, digital economy, and connectivity. And these are the deliverables, and the 32 deliverables have been identified, which are aligned with the 17 SDGs. And I will not repeat everything, but yeah, of course, I can mention that they are talking of setting up a global alliance for poverty reduction and development, offering 1 lakh training opportunities. China and this China Food and Agriculture Organization FAO and South Cooperation Trust Fund, and upgrading China's South Cooperation Assistance Fund into Global Development and South Cooperation Fund, and then UN enhanced support for UN Peace and Development Trust Fund. So these are some deliverables which I have shown here out of 32, which they are talking of, and the some progress that has been highlighted is shown in the to your right, that they have released first list of projects in GDI project pool with 50 practical cooperation projects, promoting global clean energy cooperation, promoting smart customs, launching the World Digital Education Alliance, and making data available from China satellite SDG Set 1 open to the world. So these are the basically some talking points from their GDI. And here you can also some more progress which they are talking about is that in June 2020, chaired high-level dialogue on GDI on the sidelines of the 14th BRICS, announced an additional $1 billion to the $3 billion already committed to by China to the Global Development and South Cooperation Fund, and they are claiming that they have received the support of over 100 countries and around 20 international organizations, including UN, for the GDI, and over 60 countries. And now I think the number is around 70 have joined the group of friends of the GDI in January 2022, and 150 institutions from around 40 countries and regions seek to establish a world technical and vocational educational league. And one important point that I would like to underline, that otherwise also tell about China's increased presence in the Pacific region, that they have set up there the China Pacific Island Countries Climate Action Cooperation Center, and 13 partner countries, 9 from the group of friends, are co-producing COVID-19 vaccines. So this is basically basically approach, operating principles, deliverables, focus areas, and some progress that they have highlighted, or they are highlighting in their official documents, which I have presented before you. And if we analyze, so what is this? So I see that the way once peaceful rise and the BRI were the organizing principle of Chinese foreign policy, now it looks that GDI may become a new foreign policy organizing principle. And GDI should be seen as a booster dose to BRI. And I would say that China is acutely aware of BRI being perceived as China-centric and through GDI it wants to remove this tag. And similarly, it is also aware of criticism of financial and environmental unviability of some of its BRI projects. That criticism it has often received, and so it wants to basically it wants to answer that criticism through GDI. And like BRI, GDI too explores basically market for Chinese companies, but in some exclusive areas. And BRI while BRI focuses on infrastructure, GDI's focus is on sustainable development, grants, capacity building, etc. And GDI is projected to be focusing on development in line with the SDGs. And it pushes forward what it terms true multilateralism and is closely aligned with the UN. And GDI, whereas BRI links Chinese market with the European market, that has been basically repeatedly said. GDI's focus is on the global south. So this is basically some similarity between the GDI and BRI. But here I would like to say that when I was reading material on this, so what I have found that still GDI basically looks a MOFA driven, Ministry of Foreign Affairs driven initiative. And I have not found much material. I have not seen by chance, maybe by chance, but it looks that what I'm saying is not that wrong. That this is exclusively MOFA driven initiative, and other ministries which basically execute such initiatives, I have not found much material from those ministries. And even the international circles, international media, and international think tank circles is also somewhat silent on the GDI. And one interesting interpretation for this silence I came across was that already international media, particularly Western media, has contributed a lot to popularize BRI. So it should not do the same for the GDI. So, and there is also now competition between various US and European initiatives and the Chinese initiatives. So this silence on GDI in the Western media and think tank circles is somewhat studied silence. And overall, the idea is nebulous and still involves quite vagueness, quite vague and opaque. And there is a lack of clarity about funding aspects. And as GDI also emphasizes that development is the key master key to all problems, and human rights, etc. And it links it with the Chinese own approach of human rights, and it shows connection with global security initiative. So somewhat, I would say that GDI's strategic communication is more or less equally disconcerting as the BRI's has been. And now I am moving towards this global security initiative. This initiative was offered at Boao Forum for Asia annual conference on 21st April 2022, and later in February 2023, China released the Global Security Initiative concept paper. And in this, in the GSI, China has propounded the following 6 core concepts and principles. And if you can trace all these principles to the earlier concepts also, like their new security concept. These principles you can take back to the Punch Shield directly. I would say that staying committed to the vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, commitment to respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, and staying committed to abiding by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. And you can read that these are familiar things that they are saying, but what is new is that the way they have packaged it and they are presenting it to the world. And this is basically this is from, because my screen is covered by, yeah. This is from their concept paper, in which they are basically formulating a new agenda for peace put forward in their agenda by UN Secretary General. They are talking of promoting coordination and sound interaction among major countries, upholding the consensus that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought, promoting political settlement of international and regional hotspot issues. And these were the basic, this basically there are around 20 or so thematic areas. Basically, it's a quite lengthy document. I have just highlighted it just to show the geographic canvas of the global security initiative. They are basically presenting to the world, and it's basically covers entire the regions from Africa to Latin America, to the Pacific Islands, and virtually every part of the world is under their global security initiative. And these are some priorities, and these are priorities of cooperation, in which we can see the terrorism, the fight against terrorism, strengthening biosecurity risk management, support the WHO in playing a leading role in global governance in public health, cooperate to address climate change and maintain stable and smooth supply and industrial chains. And these are basically their mechanisms which they are talking about, which they would like to create for to implement and to extend GSI to the world, and in which in saying that basically the familiar things, and they are basically encompassing all the things that they have been doing like playing a leading role in creating SEO, BRICS cooperation, and then their own conference on interaction and confidence building measures in Asia, China plus Central Asia, and they have brought all these disparate and different elements within this initiative that is global security initiative. And again, they are basically they have given their support for China Africa Peace and Security Forum, the Middle East Security Forum, and now China is willing to provide other developing countries with 5,000 training opportunities in the next 5 years to train professionals for addressing global security issues. So here, basically, my point is this: it looks basically a laundry list. People can dismiss it that way. I'm not denying that, because most of the things can be said that they have been saying and doing this for long. But my point is this: it should be seen as their roadmap, and as a security roadmap to the in which basically now they are aspiring to become a security partner for all, for every region of the world, and to tackle almost every problem of the world. This was the thing basically we used to expect from the US and the Western powers. Now China is for the first time basically projecting its intentions and aspirations on a global scale. And the GSI's basically importance lies in understanding that aspiration and that intention. And look at initiative and activities post the Global Security Initiative, or around that time it was launched. So we see a newly developing peace activist or security activist type of approach in Chinese foreign policy. It all started basically a China Central Asia community with a shared future established in 2022, a 5-point initiative on achieving security and stability in Middle East in March 2021. Informal meetings on Afghanistan between the foreign ministers of China, Russia, Pakistan, and Iran since September 2021. Then China Horn of Africa Peace, Good Governance and Development Conference in June 2022. And immediately after that, before that, it had appointed first special envoy sweeping for the Horn of Africa in February 2022. Security agreement with Solomon Islands in April 2022. It tried to offer a Pacific-wide police and security pact to the Pacific Islands countries in May 2022, but it could not go through. And finally, 12-point peace plan for the Ukraine crisis in February 2023, and brokering a deal between and by this basically they surprised everyone that when they brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia in March 2023. And of course, now we see that China is probably getting more and more intimately involved in Ukrainian crisis and trying to crisis, and the Xi Zelensky phone call and China delegation to Ukraine and other countries regarding this crisis. So the point is that after the COVID-19, we were, most of us, and if not most, some of us were apprehending that China will go insular and will get more and more engrossed in domestic affairs of repairing economy and taking care of domestic politics. That was a kind of tentative assessment around the time when Xi Jinping scored third term last year, but very soon they belied this. They have told that is not correct, and they have come in a big way with so many foreign policy initiatives and foreign and peace and security activists in the world. I'm moving the third part, that is last part, global civilization initiative, and I agree with Jabin Jacob that it is probably the most initiative which we should take very, very seriously, and I would even say that it is a very insidious initiative, and initiative probably more than the previous two. It was proposed by Xi in his keynote address entitled "Join Hands on the Path Towards Modernization" at the CPC in dialogue with world political parties high-level meeting on March 15 and 2023. Authoritative commentaries from China have already described GSI. I'm just using their word, it's not my words. GSI epitomizing Xi Jinping's profound strategic vision, broad historical perspective, a strong sense of responsibility for the times, and deep care for humanity. Authoritative commentaries from Chinese publications have described this in this way, and it is underscored that respect and safeguarding the authority and the status of UN, increasing synergy with UN educational, scientific, cultural organization and UN must be upheld. Again, linking with their all initiatives with the UN and this too. And they want that all nations join hands with all relevant parties in implementing the global agenda for dialogue among civilization. And so the core principles of this initiative is that China advocates the respect for diversity of civilizations and expects others to do the same. They advocate the common values of humanity. They advocate the importance of inheritance and innovation of civilizations. They advocate robust international people-to-people exchanges and cooperation. These are the core principles which they are saying. So if we look at, so I would say that Chinese have already declared its success, that the GSI has received extensive attention worldwide, and now its implementation requires just joint efforts of all parties with maximum synergy. But if I would say that it's a very new initiative, and specific activities in response to the GCI are yet to pick up. And most of the few activities that are reported are very low-key and endorsement write-ups and statements and media bites by odd persons that in most cases appear to have been encouraged. And besides this, and I would also say that besides these endorsements are emanating from countries such as Pakistan, Ghana, Somalia, and Greece. But having said that, a professor of history at the University of Manitoba, Professor Henry Heller, basically has seen the GCI as American rules versus Chinese global civilization. And I was reading a commentary by an Azerbaijani commentator who remarked that it's and he remarked very specific context of GCI that a new class of civilization is underway. And the economist interpreted the Xi's premise that civilizations can live in harmony, as conveying that West must stop promoting its values. If it doesn't stop its values, then Huntington will be proven right. And finally, the Wall Street Journal basically ran a story after the announcement of the GCI that now China is starting to act like a global power, and Beijing grows bolder in challenging the US-led global order. In this, when we are talking of culture, so some extra points I would like to make, that celebration of China's fine traditional cultural values has become a mainstay in Xi Jinping's thought. While he continues to pay court to Marxism and Maoism, it is Confucianism that he breathes. He opposes cultural exceptionalism, but at the same time, he has a staunch faith in inherent greatness and goodness of Chinese cultural values and native Chinese wisdom. He has been striving for recognition and parity for Chinese culture, basically read political system, and is linking it with respect for cultural diversity of the non-Western countries. In brief, that modernization does not mean Westernization is old Chinese quarrel, which Xi Jinping is expressing in terms of culture and historical inheritance. And I would like to just give this to draw your attention these two statements, that in the inaugural conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations (CDAC) in May 2019, as Xi Jinping said, if someone thinks their own race and civilization is superior and insists on remodeling or replacing other civilizations, it would be a stupid idea and disastrous act. Basically, this statement was in response to Kiron Skinner's statement that the US-China competition is a fight with a really different civilization and a different ideology. And for the first time, the US had faced a great power competitor that is not Caucasian. So the other Bejani professor that was commentator that was making a point about that a clash of civilization is already underway, it's already going on. So there are people other side in the United States and elsewhere, they have already seen the struggle with China as basically a sort of a clash of civilization. But these are basically rhetorical remarks. But I would definitely like to say that this idea of this global civilizational initiative from Chinese side really needs a thorough scrutiny, because in which culture is being used by the Chinese elites to meet the end of their to serve the objective of the present regime. And this basically, what should I say, that how should I say this, that the elites, so after a point it looks that the elites are making a very opportunistic use of culture. And when they talk of, and it's when we talk of that whether the fight their quarrel against liberal order, liberalism, fight against liberalism, we have to be very careful in taking a position in that, because we cannot discard the liberal order that the world arrived at 70 years ago, and we should not forget those contexts from which the liberal order came. And when the China itself talks of redefining liberal order and giving much higher values derived from Chinese culture, like respect for sovereignty, like respect for equal respect for countries regardless of their size, and when they talk of international cooperation, consultative frameworks. So their actions in their periphery and in their periphery are there to contradict them, and these kinds of statements must be viewed by their neighbors with a sense of irony. And another point is this, that liberal order that has been created is a clear structure, and we do not know, regardless of their polemics, their rhetoric, what they want to demolish it. What they have to offer, we do not know, because lastly, all these kinds of orders are created on the basis of universal appeal and universal appeal. Cultural relativism cannot be a binding factor of the global society. And I would say that the way the Greek philosophy was not entirely Greek, so this liberal order is not entirely American or the European now. Countries like India have also contributed a lot. So when the Chinese are preaching cultural relativism in the name of global civilization, in their global civilization initiative, we have to be very careful, as we neither belong to China nor belong to the West. So what should be our approach to this initiative? And now I am coming to the last part of my point. Basically, I have drawn these points from Andrew Nathan and Poshu Chan, that what they are trying to if we read all these three initiatives combinedly, so more or less what they are trying to convey to the world is that China as a power is a very different power from the US. They are trying to convince. When it comes to sovereign equality, no unilateral invasions or sanctions as United States does. Democratization of international relations, no interest being the guarantor of a self-defined world order, unlike the United States. Dialogue and consultation, common security and win-win cooperation, no wanton use of hard military and economic power to coerce others, as US has been doing. And international liberal order does not have only one definition. And China can be a different power that will refrain from using its growing power selfishly, because the altruistic use of power is rooted in China's culture. Basically, this is what they are saying, and they are trying to argue, and they are trying to convince the world about the nature of Chinese power. That the nature of Chinese power is very different from the existing world power, the United States, which they want to replace. And how successful these initiatives have? So I would say these initiatives and messages have found resonance with the countries those want to constrain the US power. There is no denying of that. These initiatives are also resonating with authoritarian, semi-authoritarian, and weak regimes. And there is utilitarian value that makes them popular in global South, some of global South countries. There is no doubt about it. These initiatives and perspectives should also appeal to smaller countries who want to balance, whom they consider a local hegemon. India and its neighbors in South Asia can be a case in point. And in crisis situations like in Ukraine, there will always be some takers of Chinese views, because people want to get out of those kind of hellish situations. And what are the handicaps and challenges these initiatives have? So far the biggest handicap that sees global perspectives suffer is that they have been unable to forge a sense of common ideological or cultural identity anywhere. China enjoys cultural affinity in countries like North Korea, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Singapore, but even these countries are apprehensive of undesirable Chinese political and economic influence. And China's value relativism, cultural relativism is unlikely to receive the level of approval Western liberalism has received in the last 200 years or so, or even the Marxist egalitarianism received during the days of the USSR and the Maoist China. There is popular resistance against China on the host of issues such as trade deficit, non-transparent financing, and export of Chinese labors, etc. And I would say that China's irredentist core interests basically drag down its global perspectives. And China contradicts virtually every larger, which it calls global, principle it espouses very much in its neighborhood. And if we look at official promotion of its ethno-nationalism and overseas nationalism, undermines the so-called global perspectives. Finally, I would also say that slowing down of BRI has proven that it does not have endless supply of money. If it wants to promote all these values, just basically trying to export prosperity, etc., and just trying to export the philosophy or capacity-centric philosophy. So there is a limit to that. But the overall view is this. My generalization is this, having taken into account everything, that China has decided to act like a superpower. And these global initiatives, 3 global initiatives, very much tell that. And whether it would be able to replicate the approval for the USR or the USSR in the US or the USSR in the past, or the British Empire in distant past, is a different matter. But its influence is definitely growing. And it is fast bridging its gap in national power with the US, and appears to be emerging as an alternative leader in the international society. Sorry for this typo. And its foreign policy strategies focus is now on the global south. These 3 initiatives basically indicate towards that. And China's initiatives will have their share of successes and failures. There is no doubt about that. But China has begun dealing with the world from a much higher vantage point, and most countries need to recraft, recalibrate, or readjust their policies, keeping China in mind for a considerably long period. It is not advisable to dismiss China's initiatives merely as a laundry list, wish list, or plain language. The initiatives are strategic communication that throws light on the thematic and geographical expanse China wants to cover in its foreign policy. And language and phraseology all matter. They all matter because they shape international law and norms. They upgrade them or they downgrade them. With this, I would say thanks to all of you patiently listening me, and the ICS for allowing me to make this presentation here at this platform. Thanks.
Thank you, Prashant. And as the audience would have noticed, I've let him speak a little over time. I wasn't being a bad chair. I was actually being a good chair and not interrupting a great presentation in great flow. I thought all of what Prashant said needed to be listened to very carefully. I have to say that while there have been lots of analysis and discussions on the GDI, GSI, GC, well, not so much on the GCI, but they have been in bits and pieces, in pockets, but none have, I think, to my knowledge, brought them together so comprehensively in detail as Prashant has done today for us. So I suspect that this will be a presentation that many people will come back again and again, at least on the YouTube channel of the ICS. So while everyone is sort of putting their thoughts together in terms of questions, etc., let me quickly highlight a few things that stood out for me. Number one, of course, the fact that he brings together all 3 initiatives, and he highlights specifically the special nature of the GCI. The GCI, more than the other 2 initiatives, as he pointed out, is probably the one that we need to be paying more attention to. And at the same time, it's also somewhat naturally, at least for Asian countries, the one that we'd all be the most concerned about, precisely because of our experience historically and in the current geopolitical scenario with what China has been doing and what China has been saying. I think certainly he brought out all these, he sort of delved very deeply into the GDI, and I think it's very important to note that this is pitched in terms of language of sustainable development goals, etc. But it is clearly a case of ambition. It is clearly a scaling up of ambition from the BRI. I mean, here Prashant does say that one of China's biggest intentions is to present itself as a geopolitical equal to the United States. Now, look at the difference between the American and the Chinese economies. There's still a big gap between them. And yet the Chinese are presenting themselves as a geopolitical equivalent. Here in India, meanwhile, we say that we can't even engage in a limited conflict on the LAC with the Chinese because their economy is 4 or 5 times bigger than ours. But the Chinese have a completely different philosophy as far as this is concerned. Second, I think a very important point is the linkage between domestic politics and China's international actions. So if anything, this drives home the need to understand the domestic dynamics at play in China politically and within the Chinese economy. Third, I would say it's very important to underline that when we say China and Chinese, we are talking about the Chinese party state. It is the Communist Party of China that we are looking at here. If you talk about what's been happening in terms of Chinese foreign policy, bull foreign diplomacy, etc., this is not rational behavior for Chinese diplomats, right? A diplomat is supposed to strengthen his country's image or create a positive image of his country in foreign capitals, but that is not what Chinese diplomats are trying to do. And that the only explanation for that is diplomats serve not a country or a national entity, but a political entity. So when it becomes a case of regime interest over national interest, we have things like bull foreign diplomacy and so on. And fourth, I think, especially through the Global Civilization Initiative, and some of the rhetoric that surrounds the GDI and the GSI, I would even argue that it's an increasingly racialized foreign policy. I mean, Wang Yi was recently I think just a couple of days ago, in a meeting with the Chinese and Japanese, Japanese and Koreans on an international cooperation forum in Qingdao. He said, and this is particularly offensive, he says to them, no matter how yellow your hair is or how sharp your nose is, you can't become a Westerner. I mean, in a sense, he's completely setting aside the possibility of a mental connect with West or a philosophical connection with the West, but he boils it down to one's skin color, one's race, and so on. And he says, you need to know where your roots are. And when you say something like that to the Chinese, to the Japanese and the Koreans, essentially you are trying to hierarchize or put up front or on the top Chinese contribution to their civilization or their culture and so on, right? And so when you talk about a community of shared human destiny, it is, as Prashant says, I mean, there has to be, one has to take this rhetoric very carefully. And there must be a distinction made between what is state goals and what the Chinese state says on paper or in speeches and what actually plays out on the ground. I mean, simple things like what he talks about, smart customs, smart borders, smart connectivity. I mean, these are all development initiatives, World Digital Education Alliance, etc. But these have very real world security and political implications. Security implications because your data networks are on Chinese systems or running on Chinese hardware and software, plus implications for privacy, implications for civil rights. And if you see what's happening inside China, that is certainly not a model that other countries are going to be comfortable with, unless, of course, they are run by authoritarian states, right? That he pointed out training and fellowships and scholarships. Now, all of this is, of course, a positive good. In many ways, they are copying what the Americans are doing. But what are you training if your political system is of one sort? If your political system is not open, and if you have something called a Global Civilization Initiative, where you're trying to put China at the top of a global hierarchy, then that is where you're not supposed to debate it, but you're supposed to simply accept it. Then it is quite different from how the Americans or the Westerners went about these same training modules. Of course, they were pushing their geopolitical agenda, but it did not mean that they were closed societies. So this is a very different training or an approach that the Chinese are doing. So, which is why, I mean, if you saw Prashant put true multilateralism in quotes, the very fact that the Chinese need to qualify multilateralism by saying true or real or whatever shows that there is something suspect about the multilateralism that they are talking about. He's quite right to say that while this is a laundry list, we cannot dismiss it as simply being a list of achievements or list of what they want to do. I think in many ways, they are pushing ahead far ahead of what they're even declaring. I mean, the Americans have just said the Chinese had a military facility in Cuba since 2019. And just yesterday, there is news that the Chinese are now actually trying to open a training facility inside Cuba. So all of this is already happening even as the Chinese are declaring. In fact, the big statement that used to be made about Chinese defense white papers, which have now stopped, is that the defense white paper was not an announcement of things to come, but an announcement of things that had already happened. So in many ways, they were not useful as an indicator of what was happening, but were telling us what had already happened, right? Now, there's no question that China will be a different power. But the difference might not be all to the good, is the point that we all have to realize. And, and I just want to emphasize again what Prashant says in the end, that language and phraseology and narratives matter, because this is where the game is won. This is where the norms and rules of the game are being shaped. And this is something where India needs to pay particularly greater attention to, and not simply, of course, by coming up with language and rhetoric of our own, but matching rhetoric with actions. So I hope that is time enough for all of you to sort of put your questions in order. I have one hand raised. Let me start with Mr. Ravi Bhuthalingam, followed by Nishant. Over to you, Mr. Bhuthalingam.
Thank you, Prashant, for that very fine presentation. You managed to cover all three initiatives in a short space of time, and you've culled out some deeper points for our reflection. And I agree with both you and Jebin that all three deserve study, and perhaps the GCI, the civilization one, most of all. So, having said that, just a couple of observations. I think you mentioned somewhere that these are loose and evolving initiatives. They carry this concept that they are not very highly structured or very highly defined, and that gives them a certain amorphous structure, but it's also able to respond to criticism and respond to how it is received. And I think this is a reflection of the old Chinese model of crossing the river by stepping on the stones. So I think it's a strength rather than a weakness in that sense. And one can see features of it in all three initiatives. For example, the GCI, I think the Chinese have learned a little more from the Confucius Institute story, where I think there was a lot of pushback in many ways. Similarly, BRI has faced a lot of criticism, and the GDI kind of tries to kind of take note of some of those things. So as far as the attractiveness is concerned, I think you rightly pointed out that there are some discordances where the core interests, particularly with neighboring countries, tend to clash with these high-sounding principles, and that's always going to be something that neighbors will have to watch out for. But I think there are two factors which are attractive generally. One is the reframing in terms of the UN resolutions, UN goals, SDGs, as you pointed out, the taking refuge under the UN structure and revitalizing UN organizations rather than a kind of rules-based order, which is the other term for the other order, but nobody really goes into who makes the rules. That is one. And the second one is the carefully staying away from the alliance-based structure. No mention of alliances, not you have to be here or there. It's more a kind of offering where you can pick and choose. We don't mind if you eat from our ice cream store, just eat a little more from our store than from his store. That seems to be the story. So I'll stop there, but again, congratulations, extremely useful.
Prashant, you want to jump in there?
No, I agree with such observations. Yeah, there is some fluidity in the initiatives, but that I think that is intentional. There is no doubt. I agree with him on that part.
All right. I would just add that just because the Chinese aren't talking about alliances, or they make it look like they are not interested in alliances, does not necessarily mean that they are not interested in alliances. In many ways, the Chinese have stronger alliances in practice, maybe not on paper, but in practice, with North Korea, with Pakistan, it gives them more bang for the buck, even though they don't call it an alliance. They call it friendship, they call it brotherhood or whatnot. But I think this is about to change because the Chinese will want to show it in language or in frames that are more that others can understand, and that will be something that will come as they grow in confidence. Over to you, Nishant.
Hello. Hi,
Yeah,
sir.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you for the comprehensive presentation. So, sir, in your presentation, you mentioned that it appears that GDI is handled exclusively by MOFA. Now, interestingly, in our last week's Wednesday seminar, Mr. Manoj Kevalramani said that GSI seems to be the brainchild of the Central National Security Commission. If it be so, how do you think the bureaucratic synergy of these initiatives will come about? By now, there is evidence that the Chinese bureaucracy is, to a certain extent, an example of a directive-driven leadership style under Xi. Now, in such bureaucracies, information flow becomes very important, and there is, of course, this running risk of information either being catered to or limited to the leader's worldview, or flawed information flowing upward, as it happened in Mao's era. Now, the risk also runs higher if information sharing gets siloed within these organs, the MOFA or the National Security Commission. So what I mean to ask is, how do you foresee the China's bureaucracy or its bureaucratic structure synergizing these three initiatives?
I see that it depends on the leadership backing. How much leadership backing these initiatives are receiving. If they are receiving the backing and active interest from the top leadership, and if it becomes their signature in initiatives of President Xi Jinping, so all these hiccups and bureaucratic hassles, I will think they will iron out all those. So I do not see some defining impact of those hassles on these initiatives. But in my view, because I didn't read Mr. Kevalramani's talk, I would just mention about this GDI part. So because GDI part, there is one thing very clear. This tentative research that is telling me that lots of material that is coming on GDI is coming from MOFA, but the ministries or agencies that give money. So from that side, till I would say that I haven't come across any material, and many commentators have duly highlighted this point. So that is a basically practical problem, because already you see the BRI people are making so many analyses about BRI, that BRI has become overstretched and the impact of COVID-19 on their economy. So that may be partly or mainly because of that. But once they have decided that they have to carry forward these initiatives, and basically the leadership. So I think the bureaucratic hassles will not be some major or defining hindrance in the executing of these initiatives.
Right. Thank you, Prashant. If I might just follow up on that, one of the agencies that was the agency that was in charge of the BRI is the NDRC. Where do you see the NDRC's role vis-a-vis the Global Development Initiative?
So as of now, I won't be able to share much on that, but because when I was doing research for this presentation, I didn't find much mention of that. On the financing part, I didn't find much mention.
All right.
So that's why I'm saying it is still a foreign policy initiative than a hardcore economic initiative. And how much it is, and basically how much hardcore economic backing it will get, I think we need to wait a little more.
Okay. All right. Okay, that sounds fair enough. There's a question from Anand P. Krishnan in the chat box. So notwithstanding these three new initiatives and building on from BRI, can a case be made that China actually seeks to have the best of both worlds, global North and global South, some kind of a hybrid identity? And if that is indeed so, how would the contradictions that arise in the process be resolved? Can China play in both camps, like it tries, I suppose, with climate change negotiations?
Yeah, it's a fair observation. I can agree with this only. Yeah, they are trying to, they are basically, and they are trying to be part of both global north and global south. Their development is taking them to the global, towards the global north. But in terms of their national identity and their foreign policy discourse and the world, in the identification with the countries in the world, they still want to retain their global south identity. Yeah, after a point like this, some contradictions developed on their the what you mentioned this on their approach towards climate issues. So, but I said this, yeah, there is a strong there is a possibility that contradictions will develop, but still how, in what form, in what shape, I cannot say at this point in time. But the point is very valid. I agree.
All right. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I have Avinash from OP Jindal University. Avinash Godbole, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jabin. Thank you, Prashant, for the good presentation. I wanted to understand, do you see any challenge to democracy as a system in any of these three initiatives? Like democracies are underperforming, or the idea of Chinese model that came up in the party congress before the last one. Do you think any of these three initiatives put together challenge democracy as a system, even if not directly, in subtle references that you might have seen?
Challenge is very much there. They are trying to redefine their liberal international order as they perceive what liberalism is, and they are trying to very much discredit the existing liberal order. They are coming up with their own whole this definition of whole process democracy, which puts which is at variance with the democracy as we understand it. But if you mean that challenge whether they succeed or whether they will be able to whether they will receive or enjoy as much approval as the US or the liberal democracies have done in the world, then it's basically a matter of conviction. I think then that they won't, because all these talks, because as I say that if you crystallize what all they are saying into just 2 or 3 points, we are basically they are talking of cultural relativism, value relativism. They are talking of capacity and process capacity. They are highlighting capacity centric philosophy. They are basically trying to promote prosperity as a value, and I think I have serious doubt that these can be binding values of any globally for a global society, because my conviction is this: they will not be able to match with the resilience of free and open society and democratic societies. So they are posing a challenge. But if your question is whether they will substantially undermine the democratic world order and democracies across the world, I have doubt basically. Because democracies have their inherent.
I didn't mean about democratic world order. I meant about the democratic governance system. So particularly in reference to country like India, large but developing, slow and bureaucratic, and can't get over its problems. Right? That's the image that they want to project of India, for example. So in that sense, democracy has domestic governance systems around the world. Do you see any element of challenge to that already in this?
My overall take is basically is the same what I'm saying, that their challenges are there. The existing democracies will have to present themselves even better than them. So that way challenge is there, because lastly, as long as China is rising and growing under the same system, so that Chinese model will always be there and posing questions to the other within other societies also. That challenge, I am not denying, challenge is there, but I think that democracy it's a challenge, and the democracy should accept this challenge and try to redefine them again, and try that way. I say that this challenge will basically force liberal order to have a relook and to redefine itself.
Well, let's hope it does.
Yeah.
This sort of reconsideration or relook is not entirely guaranteed.
Yes.
which is probably what the Chinese are also sort of playing on. So question from Dr. Abu Zafar. When Saudi-Iran rapprochement took place, there was questions about India. Well, good, we are coming to India. Where do you see Indian wisdom in this regard compared to China? Since you've talked a great deal about Chinese wisdom, I suppose it is only fair that you talk a little bit about Indian wisdom.
I will leave it for the chair to delve into, because I just follow in my academic profession, I just follow China, not India. Sorry, pardon me for not taking up this question.
No, I think I think the answer is the same as what was given to this to previous question to by Avinash, which is that this is an opportunity for other countries to figure out what it is that they can also do better. I mean, India is a near neighbor of Iran's and Saudis, right? Why is it that India has not been able to take an initiative is a question that Indian policymakers, Indian analysts need to ask themselves, right? Well, the more China does, I think the more it is important for us to understand what we can do better. So two questions, one from our YouTube channel and one in the chat box, both related to China's new foreign relations law, right? And how do these, what is the relationship between these three initiatives and the foreign relations law, in your view?
This recent foreign relations law.
Yeah.
So what is the exact question? It's related to India? What?
No. It is what is the these now these three initiatives are out. How do they play in conjunction with China's foreign relations law, which, as everybody will know, is basically penalizes countries that do not respect what the Chinese call their sovereignty boundaries, or their boundaries, their sovereignty, and their policies. So in a sense, you have on the one hand these open, so-called open policies of development, security, and civilization, which are on the surface of it open-ended or open-minded. But on the other hand, you also have China's domestic laws, which are targeted at foreign citizens, foreign entities, foreign countries. So how does China manage this, both of them together?
So as I said, that I also mentioned this point about that their ethno-nationalism overseas, in many ways, it's basically already contradicting this their global perspectives. So I have not studied the foreign relations law yet, because I have to go through it. But that way, in the same case will be the same can be said about it also, that it may be one more example of its own actions contradicting its own larger principles and pronouncements.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair point. I mean, China is trying to juggle multiple balls in the air at the same time, and it is not always necessary that there will be a clean line or a path connecting all of its policies. And where there are contradictions, I suppose it is the business of the analyst and the observer to actually call them out. All right, question from Rajiv Ranjan from Delhi University. If I have not misheard you, GDI is a MOFA initiative only, unlike BRI. But looking at the projects sanctioned by China under GDI, there are many ministries and departments like CIDCA, Ministry of Ecology, Chinese Customs, Department of Commerce, etc. involved. Yeah, I mean, this is always a whole of the system approach that the Chinese have. Maybe one ministry is in the lead or taking point at any given point in time. And one question, do you think that these three initiatives are gradually going to replace BRI as the main drivers of Chinese foreign policy? So at the moment, we have the BRI still running, but you also have these three initiatives. So do you see them?
There is a possibility. I think there is a possibility of
that they will eventually replace the BRI in your view?
There is a possibility.
Okay, but I mean, can you tell us a bit more in the sense, and how do you see the BRI? What happens to the BRI?
BRI, see, we need to follow carefully BRI, in which direction and what strength BRI is going. BRI will not wither away, or it will not disappear. But as I was reading some material on this, so it will coexist maybe in some weaker form. It immediately is not going to go away.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you one question. So I think at some point you did state that the status of the Chinese economy also is a factor in global development initiative and all of these initiatives. How do you see, now that the government, the Chinese party state, has announced these three initiatives, which are at the end of the day still going to require a great deal of money and so on, or investments, how do you see the Chinese pushing ahead with this if the Chinese economy enters a crisis, or there is greater pushback on the Chinese economy, economic trade sanctions, Chinese investments in China and so on from the West? How do you see this?
I will think that they will carry on with this narrative as long as possible.
I mean, more narrative than action, in your view?
The financial muscle will, of course, matter, but it's not that their financial muscle is going to disappear. So they will press with this these initiatives and this narrative as long as it is sustainable for them. But whether do you really see that the Chinese economy is going into so deep crisis that they will finally have to decide to quit these initiatives?
Well, I suppose I don't think so. I mean, the reason why they've been launched these initiatives is precisely, I think, because they have capacity, as you said, that financial muscle can never be so weak. But, it is also a useful feint. You create the impression that you're capable precisely because you have problems at home and you don't want people to be paying attention to those problems. You think that, well, if they can come up with GDI, GSI, and GCI, then the Chinese economy must be in a fairly good state, right? So I suppose we'll have to watch this space very closely, as we move along. And so on that note, I see that there are no more questions in the chat box or no raised hands. But on that note, let me end, today's session with a few words. I think, to take on from something what Prashant said at the very end about the clash of civilizations and so on, I think we in India must tread very carefully here. We don't have to be involved in the US-China equation or quarrels, but we have to deal with China on the basis of what we see. And I mean, everyone knows that we have enough of our own quarrels with the Chinese to deal with, whether on the LAC, whether on the economic front. And I suspect now increasingly also on the Global Civilization Initiative, because there is a certain kind of narrative that is coming out of this initiative that puts down the Americans, that puts down the Indians, which we need to be able to respond to robustly in the interest of, good foreign policy, but also peace and order and stability in the region. Because this kind of language, this kind of rhetoric cannot be allowed to continue or stand without challenge. Thank you once again, Prashant, for a comprehensive presentation. There's much food for thought. There are many, many issues that you've raised, which I hope younger researchers and those watching here and those who will come and watch again on the YouTube later will pick up, will develop, will follow up on. And we look forward to seeing your own writings on the subjects in the future. So thank you again. And let me thank the ICS also for this organizing this event and for this special set of initiatives on these three, special set of seminars on these three initiatives. So over to the ICS now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this, we shall wrap today's session. We thank Dr. Singh and Dr. Jacob for gracing today's session with their presence and for granting us their precious time. The video of today's discussion shall be available on the ICS YouTube platform. We would also like to welcome all of you to our seminar next week, for which the speaker shall be Colonel Ajay Shukla. At the ICS, we conduct seminars every Wednesday, and information regarding the same is available on the ICS website. You may also subscribe to our newsletter